You don't notice the moment it starts because it doesn't announce itself with noise or pain. It arrives quietly, like a habit you learned so early you forgot it was learned at all. And before you realize what's happening, you're already living most of your life somewhere behind your eyes, replaying conversations that already ended, rehearsing ones that may never happen, building entire futures in your head while your body sits still, breathing, waiting, obedient, as if it were never meant to lead. You've carried this longer than you admit. There's a split that happens in you, subtle but total, where thinking becomes safer than acting, where imagining feels more controlled than moving, where the mind builds a small, private kingdom because the real world feels too sharp, too unpredictable, too capable of hurting you again. And at first, this inner world feels like intelligence, like depth, like awareness, until one day you look up and realize years have passed and nothing has moved except your thoughts, which never stop moving, never rest, never finish anything they start. This is the moment your life begins to make sense. Because the prison you're in doesn't have walls. It has thoughts, and they don't lock you in by force. They convince you it's safer inside. They tell you that one more insight, one more realization, one more breakthrough inside your head will finally make you ready to live. But readiness never comes because readiness is not a thought. It's a step, and you haven't taken it yet. You're not broken. You were never taught another way. No one taught you how dangerous it is to mistake thinking for living, how easy it is to confuse analysis with progress, how comforting it feels to believe that understanding is the same as changing, and how brutal the cost becomes when you realize that clarity without movement slowly turns into paralysis, and paralysis eventually feels like who you are. You survive in your head because your head learned how to survive when the world didn't feel safe, and now it won't let go, even though the danger has changed, even though the threat is no longer out there, even though the only thing holding you back now is the same voice that once protected you. You're allowed to want more, but wanting more means something has to die. And what dies first is the illusion that you can think your way into a different life without ever stepping into it, that you can outsmart fear by reasoning with it, that you can wait until certainty arrives before you move, even though certainty never visits people who stay still. The moment you finally stop living in your head is not peaceful, it's violent in a quiet way, because it feels like letting go of the one place you felt in control. It feels like stepping out of a room where you've been rehearsing forever and onto a stage with no script, no guarantees, no pause button, just breath, gravity, and consequences. And that's exactly why everything changes. Because reality responds to movement, not thought. And once you feel that, once you taste it even for a second, the spell begins to break. And the mind that once ruled you starts to panic because it knows its dominance is ending. It knows it can't keep you safe anymore if you're not listening. And it will try one last time to pull you back with doubts, with overthinking, with warnings dressed as wisdom, whispering that you're not ready, that you need to understand more, that now isn't the time. That's how you know you're close. Because the mind only tightens its grip when it senses you're about to leave. You learned early that being present had consequences, that speaking, acting, choosing, or even wanting something out loud could lead to disappointment, rejection, or loss. And so your system adapted in the only way it knew how, by retreating inward, by turning thought into a shield, by making observations safer than participation. And over time, this strategy hardened into identity. You became the thinker, the observer, the one who sees everything, understands everything, anticipates everything, but somehow never feels fully here, never fully inside your own body, never fully committed to the moment you're standing in, because commitment means risk, and risk reminds the nervous system of wounds it never finished processing. You survive things you still don't have words for. So your mind learned to stay ahead, to predict, to analyze, to replay, to prepare for every possible outcome except the one that requires courage without certainty. And now it does this so automatically that you mistake it for who you are, not realizing it's just a pattern, a loop that once kept you safe and now keeps you small. There's a lie hidden inside overthinking that sounds intelligent when you first hear it, and it says that if you just think long enough, deep enough, carefully enough, you can avoid pain, you can avoid mistakes, you can avoid looking foolish, you can avoid choosing wrong. But what it never tells you is that avoidance is still a choice, and it always chooses stagnation for you. The mind loves to stay busy because stillness would force it to feel, and feeling would force it to remember. And remembering might crack open things it buried to keep you functioning. So it fills every quiet moment with noise, every pause with commentary, every impulse with analysis, until you don't even notice how exhausted you are from carrying a conversation in your head that never ends. It's okay to feel this. Most people don't realize they're stuck in their head because it doesn't feel like being stuck. It feels like being active, like being aware, like being deep. But depth without direction becomes a pit, and awareness without action becomes a cage. And the longer you live this way, the more foreign action begins to feel, as if moving forward belongs to other people, braver people, simpler people, people who don't think as much as you do. That's another lie. You don't think more because you're smarter, you think more because you're afraid, and fear learned to speak in your voice so well that you stopped recognizing it as fear at all. You started calling it caution, realism, self-awareness, maturity, anything except what it actually is. And here's the part most people miss, the part that changes everything once you see it. The mind does not want you free, it wants you safe. And safety to the mind means familiarity, even if that familiarity is miserable, even if it costs you your future, even if it slowly drains the life out of you one thought at a time. So it keeps you planning instead of doing, researching instead of starting, imagining instead of risking, and it rewards you with the feeling of being productive while nothing in your external life actually changes. You're not imagining this. There is a moment coming, subtle and sharp, where you'll realize that your greatest insights have never saved you. Your deepest realizations have never moved you. Your most profound thoughts have never held you when you were alone at night wondering why you still feel unfulfilled. And that's when the hunger for something real begins to override the comfort of staying inside your head. That hunger is not weakness. It's the signal. The shift doesn't happen when you finally understand everything. It happens when understanding loses its power over you, when you realize that clarity has become your excuse, not your catalyst, and something in you starts to rebel against the endless inner commentary that keeps narrating your life instead of letting you live it. At first, the rebellion is quiet, almost invisible, a small impatience with your own thinking, a subtle frustration when you catch yourself replaying the same mental patterns, the same imagined futures, the same rehearsed explanations, and for the first time you don't feel impressed by them. You feel tired of them. This is the first psychological shift. You begin to sense that your mind has been speaking without permission, that it has been running the show based on old data, old fears, old rules that no longer apply, and the more you notice it, the harder it becomes to unsee how much of your life has been delayed by waiting to feel ready. Readiness is a myth your mind invented to stay in control, because readiness implies a moment where fear disappears, where doubt quiets down, where the path becomes obvious. And that moment never comes for people who rely on thinking alone. It only comes for people who move despite uncertainty. And your system knows this, which is why it resists the shift so strongly. When you start to step out of your head, even slightly, your body reacts before your thoughts do. Your breath changes, your posture shifts, your senses sharpen, and for a brief moment you feel exposed, raw, almost clumsy in your own skin, as if you've been away from yourself for so long that returning feels unfamiliar. This discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're finally doing something real. The mind hates this phase because it can't dominate it. It can comment, it can judge, it can warn, but it can't fully control what happens once you're present, because presence belongs to the body, to sensation, to movement, to instinct, and those don't ask for permission from thought. You start to notice how often you've used thinking to delay contact with the world, how often you've chosen the safety of observation over the risk of participation, and how that choice, repeated thousands of times, quietly shaped your identity into someone who feels like they're always on the outside of their own life. This is the moment your life begins to make sense. Not because you finally solved yourself, but because you stopped trying to. Because you realize that you don't need to be fixed before you act. You need to act so that what's real can begin to shape you. The predator here is not the world, it's the voice that keeps you contained, and the prey is the version of you that still believes thinking is protection. But awareness flips the dynamic, because once you see the pattern clearly, it can't hunt you the same way anymore. Awareness becomes a weapon. And the first thing it cuts is the illusion that staying in your head has kept you safe, when in reality, it has kept you waiting. There is a hidden threat that appears right after you begin to wake up from the habit of living in your head, and it doesn't come from the outside. It comes from the part of you that benefited from staying stuck. The part that learned how to survive by withdrawing, by thinking instead of acting, by controlling instead of risking, and it will not give up quietly. It will disguise itself as responsibility, as intelligence, as caution, as depth. It will tell you that presence is reckless, that action without full understanding is dangerous, that slowing the thinking means lowering your standards. But what it's really defending is its position of power. Because as long as you live in your head, the mind stays in charge. The moment you step into your body, into the present, into real decisions with real consequences, that hierarchy collapses, and the part of you that has been ruling through fear starts to feel exposed, obsolete, and threatened. This is where many people turn back. They mistake resistance for intuition, discomfort for danger, fear for wisdom, and they retreat into thinking again, telling themselves they'll come back to action later when they've processed more, healed more, learned more, but later becomes never, and the cycle tightens. You've carried this longer than you admit. The conflict here is not between you and the world. It's between two versions of you, one that wants certainty before movement and one that understands. Finally, that movement is what creates certainty, and they cannot coexist for long without tension. You will feel pulled in opposite directions, drawn toward presence and yanked back into analysis. And this tug of war is exhausting because you're no longer fully asleep, but you're not fully free either. You're standing in the doorway, aware of the cost of going back and terrified of what stepping forward might require. This is where silence becomes important. Not the silence of withdrawal, but the silence where you stop arguing with your thoughts, stop negotiating with fear, stop trying to convince yourself that it's okay to live, and simply act in small, grounded ways that bring you back into contact with reality. Your feet on the ground, your breath in your chest, your attention where you are instead of where you imagine you should be. You're allowed to want more. Wanting more means choosing reality over rehearsal, presence over prediction, action over endless preparation, and that choice will feel like betrayal to the part of you that survived by hiding. But survival is not the same as living, and something in you already knows that. The deeper threat is this: if you keep living in your head, you will remain safe from failure, but you will also remain untouched by fulfillment. Because fulfillment is not a thought. It's a sensation that only arrives when you risk being fully here. This is the line. On one side is the familiar comfort of thinking. On the other is the unfamiliar weight of reality. And once you see it clearly, you can't pretend you don't know what's costing you your life one quiet day at a time. The door is already open. The only question now is whether you step through it. There's a quiet truth waiting here, and it doesn't rush you because it knows you've rushed yourself for long enough. And the truth is this: the mind was never meant to be your home. It was meant to be a tool, but somewhere along the way you moved in, rearranged the furniture, built routines around it, and forgot what it feels like to live anywhere else. You don't exit your head all at once. You loosen your grip on it. You start noticing how often you're not actually responding to life, but to your interpretation of it. How many moments you miss because you're busy evaluating them. How many opportunities pass because you're still calculating outcomes that only exist in imagination. And this noticing isn't harsh, it's almost gentle, like catching yourself holding your breath and finally exhaling. You're not broken. You were never taught another way. Most people were rewarded for thinking, praised for being mature, self-aware, deep, and no one warned you that the same habit, left unchecked, slowly turns into a barrier between you and experience. A wall made of thoughts so convincing you mistake them for reality itself. Here's the revelation that changes the trajectory quietly but permanently. The mind does not need to be silenced for you to live. It needs to be dethroned, and dethroning doesn't mean violence or suppression. It means shifting authority back to where it belongs, to the part of you that can feel, sense, choose, and move even while thoughts are present. This is where something strange happens. When you stop obeying every thought, when you let them pass without chasing them, without arguing, without fixing, you realize how many of them were never instructions, just noise, and how much energy you've spent negotiating with a voice that was never meant to decide your life. You've carried this longer than you admit, and if this realization lands somewhere deep, you might feel the urge to pause, to reflect, to let this sit, maybe even to tell someone that this is exactly what you've been struggling with. Because when the pattern is named, it loosens. And when it loosens, you can finally breathe inside your own body again. It's okay to feel this. You might even notice a subtle desire to stay with this space, to return to it, to not fall back asleep. Because part of you already knows that something has shifted, and staying aware matters now. Not out of obligation, but because you don't want to go back to living half your life inside your head anymore. This is not motivation. It's recognition. And recognition doesn't fade easily once it's felt. Small moments start to feel heavier in a good way, like they finally have weight again. The sound of your footsteps, the feeling of air against your skin, the pause before you speak. And these moments don't announce themselves as breakthroughs. They arrive quietly, and that's why they're real. You catch yourself before spiraling. Not perfectly, not always, but once is enough to change the pattern. There's a microsecond where you notice the urge to retreat into thinking, to analyze, to replay, and instead you stay. You let the discomfort exist without naming it, without explaining it, without fixing it, and for the first time in a long time, you feel something like ground beneath you. This is presence. It doesn't feel euphoric, it feels honest. And honesty can feel raw when you're used to distance, because distance numbs things just enough to function. But presence removes the filter, and sensations return with clarity. Sometimes pleasant, sometimes sharp, always alive. You survive things you still don't have words for. So of course presence feels intense. So of course your system learned to escape. But now as you let these micro moments stack, something stabilizes, not the mind, but you. And you begin to realize that you don't need to be calm to be present. You don't need to be confident to act. You don't need certainty to move. You just need to stay here long enough for the body to remember it knows how to live. The mind will interrupt. Let it. You don't need to respond to every thought like it's urgent. You don't need to obey every warning like it's truth. And the more you practice not reacting internally, the more you notice how much power you actually have over where your attention lives. This is where people change quietly, not in grand gestures, but in the way they pause before disappearing into their head, in the way they choose to feel something instead of analyze it, in the way they act even while doubt is present. Because doubt no longer has veto power. You're allowed to want more. And wanting more now looks like this: choosing presence even when it's uncomfortable, choosing reality even when it's uncertain, choosing movement even when the mind protests. And each time you do, the old pattern weakens, not because you fought it, but because you stop feeding it. That's how power shifts. You walk into a moment that used to send you straight into your head, maybe a conversation, a decision, a risk, and you feel the familiar pull, the instinct to retreat, to observe instead of engage. But this time, something is different. You notice your feet, you feel your breath, you stay. You hear the voice start to comment, to judge, to predict, and you don't argue with it. You don't silence it. You just don't follow it. And that simple refusal changes everything. Because now you're here, actually here, not narrating, not rehearsing, not escaping. You feel the weight of your body in space. You feel the moment happening in real time. There's a slight awkwardness at first, like learning to use muscles you forgot existed, but underneath it, there's something solid, something steady, something that doesn't need approval from your thoughts to exist. This is the reversal. For so long, your mind hunted you, dragging you into futures and pasts, turning you into prey for your own thinking. But now awareness stands between you and the spiral, and the predator loses its advantage because it can only control you when you're unconscious of it. You're not imagining this. When you stay present, people feel it. Situations respond to it. Life opens in small, almost invisible ways. Because presence has gravity, it pulls reality toward you instead of pushing you away into imagination. You speak differently. You listen differently. You decide without waiting for permission from certainty. And the more you live like this, the clearer it becomes that the life you wanted was never hidden in your thoughts. It was always waiting for you to show up to it, fully, imperfectly, without guarantees. This is the moment your life begins to make sense, not because it's figured out, but because you're finally in it. There are still threads unresolved, and they need to stay that way for now, because the mind will try to grab onto answers to turn this into a new concept, a new identity, a new thing to think about instead of live, and you can feel that temptation already. Don't rush to name this. Let it remain experiential, something you practice rather than explain, because the moment you intellectualize presence, you risk turning it into another room inside your head, another place to hide instead of inhabit. Questions will arise. What if I fail? What if I choose wrong? What if I lose control? These questions don't need answers yet. They need space. The deeper work now is not solving, it's staying, staying with uncertainty, staying with sensation, staying with action even when the mind wants resolution, because resolution is how it pulls you back into dominance. You've carried this longer than you admit, and yet something in you already knows that you can't unsee this. That once you feel what it's like to live outside your head, even briefly, returning feels heavier, more suffocating, more obviously false. This awareness will test you. Life will present moments where retreat feels easier, where thinking feels safer, where old habits promise relief, and each time you'll feel the choice more clearly than before, not as a moral decision, but as an energetic one, contraction or expansion, retreat or presence. The story isn't finished yet. There is still a deeper tension coming, a rhythm shift, a final confrontation between the part of you that wants control and the part that wants aliveness, and the outcome of that confrontation will define how you move through the rest of your life. For now, stay here. Let the questions remain unanswered. Let the silence do its work, because what's coming next will only make sense if you're present enough to feel it. There's a moment where the rhythm breaks, not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably like a pause in music, where the silence itself feels heavier than sound, and in that pause you realize something irreversible has happened. You can no longer pretend that living in your head is neutral. You can feel the cost now, not as an idea, but as a weight you refuse to carry anymore. You notice how fast the mind tries to rush back in when things slow down, how it scrambles to fill space, to regain authority, to turn this shift into another concept it can manage, and for the first time you don't follow, you let the silence stretch. You let it feel awkward, unfinished, alive. This is where suspense lives. Not in fear of the world, but in fear of your own freedom, because freedom removes excuses, and excuses were the last thing protecting the old pattern from accountability. You begin to sense how much of your identity was built around being in your head. How many stories you told yourself about being thoughtful, complex, introspective, when underneath there was a quieter truth that thinking kept you distant from risk, and distance kept you safe from disappointment, but also safe from joy. You're not imagining this. As you step into presence more often, life feels sharper, more demanding, less forgiving, and that's exactly why it becomes meaningful again. Because meaning doesn't come from comfort. It comes from engagement, from showing up even when there's no guarantee of reward. The tension now is subtle but real. You can feel the old habit watching, waiting for fatigue, for stress, for uncertainty, ready to pull you back into your head the moment you slip. And instead of fighting it, you acknowledge it. You see it for what it is, a reflex. not a ruler. This is the rise, not into confidence, not into certainty, but into responsibility for where your attention lives. And that responsibility changes how you move through every moment that follows. Something strange begins to happen when you live this way consistently. People around you notice without knowing what they're noticing. Conversations shift. Opportunities appear where there were none before, not because you're trying harder, but because you're actually here to meet them. Presence makes you visible. Invisibility brings choice. You start to realize that most of what you were waiting for was never external permission. It was internal presence. And now that you're no longer hiding in thought, you see openings you used to miss, invitations you used to overthink, paths you used to postpone until someday felt safe. This is where momentum builds quietly, not through force, but through alignment. Because when your attention is grounded, your actions stop fighting each other, and life begins to respond in ways that feel almost conspiratorial, as if reality has been waiting for you to show up properly. You might feel a pull to stay connected to this state, to keep returning to it, to deepen it, not as an obsession, but as a practice. Because once you taste the difference between thinking about life and living it, you don't want to go back to watching from the sidelines. You're allowed to want more. And wanting more now looks like choosing presence again and again, even when it's inconvenient, even when it challenges your old identity, even when it asks you to act without a full mental map. That choice compounds, quietly, relentlessly. And over time, it changes what you believe is possible. The most dangerous realization arrives last, not as a shock, but as a whisper that settles deep in your chest. And it says this: the life you were waiting to understand was never meant to be understood first. It was meant to be entered. You don't need to solve yourself to live. You need to live to meet yourself. Everything you thought you needed clarity for begins to reveal itself through action, through presence, through mistakes that teach faster than insight ever could. And the fear that once ruled you shrinks, not because it disappears, but because it no longer decides. You stop asking when you'll be ready. You start moving while you're not. And in that movement, something ancient wakes up, a sense of trust in your ability to respond, adapt, recover, a knowing that you don't need to predict life to handle it, you need to be in it. This is the moment your life begins to make sense, not because it's safe, because it's yours. Every predator has a predator, and the one that hunted you longest was the habit of retreating into your head. But awareness turned the hunt around, and now the thing that once controlled you cannot survive in the light of your presence. The final line is simple. You were never meant to live in your head. You were meant to live. Click on the screen to watch the next video on how this knowledge changes what happens next, what most people never realize after this moment, and what you will start seeing differently from now on.